Hi, we want to welcome you all here at the Vandercook College of Music. We want to certainly thank Dr. Charles Mangini, president of the college, and for all of his staff for helping put this together, and to Alec Harris and GIA Publications for creating this event, and to each and every one of you who took time out of your lives to be a part of this audience. This is going to be a special occasion, and I think when we're all done, we're all going to be better people for it. And most of all, we want to thank our guest of honor, H. Robert Reynolds. This is going to be a Wagnerian opera, so hang on, we're going to go. If we could just start out with you just sharing your thoughts about the profession, what you think the most important thing is, and that signature trademark, Bob Reynolds, that we all know that makes you who you are. Would you just share some thoughts about that?
Yeah, but before I do that, I want to echo what you said about thanking people.
Oh, yeah.
So,
go.
Well, everything he said times 10 for me. I mean, it's been great to deal with everybody, and I appreciate so much the effort, energy, and thought that's gone into this. Anyway, back to your question.
It's going to be special.
To me, I've observed a lot of really great conductors in my life. Early on, when I was in California, I went to LA Philharmonic rehearsals, and they were eye-opening. And recently, I've kind of done the bookend thing because I'm back out in LA a lot, and I'm going back to LA Philharmonic rehearsals, seeing and watching the rehearsals of the really best. And what I've noticed is the difference between the really best conductors and most band conductors is that the great ones are rehearsing way differently than band conductors rehearse. They're rehearsing primarily the music. And then they get frustrated because they have to deal with intonation or precision or attacks or releases or all the other stuff that we know so well, because it's interfering with the music. It's getting in the way of the music, so I've got to deal with that. I don't really want to, but I've got to deal with that. But they really want to deal with how the music flows and how the feeling of the music and the atmosphere of the music. Where we as a profession, I think, deal primarily with teaching, and is this in tune in the right place and with the right style and the right balance and so forth, believing somehow that if we get all those things perfect, that music will somehow magically appear. Where the other kind of conductor is really making the music appear. And we're going to keep coming back to that because that's a main issue, that the difference is, and I think a lot of that has happened because we are the products now of the early band contests when the standards weren't very high, and the great conductors of the past, Ravelli and Hinesley and a whole host of other people, helped push us up to the top with standards. And now they've given us that. But we can't just keep going with that. They provided that for us. Now we've got to continue on with making music. But I think somehow we're stuck in the elimination of error, that becomes the primary motive for rehearsing. And for the other kind of conductor, the ones I've observed so much, their primary motive is to make the music live. So, there's a big difference there. So,
to hitchhike off that, would you share the story about Fennell when you talked about putting the pieces together versus the music?
Okay.
This is perfect.
Very first honor band I ever did in my life. I was, 30, maybe. I was conducting the All Southern California High School Honor Band, and they were going to do a conference. And I was to do half the concert, and they were hiring Fred Fennell, who came in to do the other half of the concert. But he was just coming in at the end, so I was to prepare all the music for both my half and his half. Well, if truth be known, I actually prepared his music better than I prepared my own. And I got the recordings. I knew every nuance and hiccup and bass drum beat and accent and everything. There wasn't anything about those recordings about how he did it that I didn't do, and the group was ready to play. My goal was that he was going to stand on the podium, get up, start conducting the pieces, and then say, well, everything is just the way I want it. There's nothing to do. But what actually happened was he got that, and the group was ready to play the concert the first moment he stood on the podium to rehearse. And the group played great. And he just took that performance-ready preparation and just went zoom. Because I had gotten all those intonation things. I had gotten all that precision and the retards and the innuendos and so forth. But he was making the music. He was saying, no, this has to be here. And the climactic point, when he conducted, and he got to the climactic point, it was like, there. Well, the only problem was that there was the downbeat. That was the climax, but it came on one. And I knew, as in my conducting textbooks, that one was down. But in his mind, it was the music that went up. Therefore, he had to go up in his conducting and rehearsing. He just opened my world, because I was conducting skillfully up to that point. I had the greatest conducting teacher ever, Elizabeth Green, who I revere her beyond any teacher I ever had. And she taught me the grammar of conducting, the language of conducting, the vocabulary of conducting. And then it was up to me to try to make music with that. But I was still, in those early days, obeying all the rules. I mean, if it was in 4/4, every measure was down, left, right, up, and that's the way it was. There was nothing like that, because that wasn't the way the conducting textbook said it should be. But that's what Fred Fennell opened up.
So it was an awakening point for you.
Oh, it was life-changing.
New landscapes.
Yep.
Autobiographical information. This is important to everybody to know. Let's go back to Meadville, your early days, and let's take it all the way to present-day USC.
Ooh.
Or some of it.
Yeah, that's going to take longer than we have. Yeah, I grew up in a little town in northwestern Pennsylvania called Meadville. And my first experience with the music was, I was told by my family, my mother and my grandparents, that I was going to get the greatest Christmas present ever. And this was all in advance. And so my mind sort of did the kid imagination thing, and it was going to be a tent or a new bicycle or, baseball glove or something really great. And I went down on Christmas morning, and it was a horn. And I tried desperately to hide my severe disappointment. It was, what use is that? And not only was it a horn, and I realized this later, it was an E-flat alto horn. Because my grandfather thought that was the easiest instrument to learn how to play. And he was probably right. He was a self-taught band director. There's a whole big story on that too, but we won't go into that. But he gave me my first lessons, and he learned everything himself. So I started playing the E-flat alto horn, and I did that for a few years, and then somebody said I should transfer to French horn, which I did. And then I played French horn, I got into the high school band, and then I talked to my high school band director because I wanted to transfer to euphonium. I didn't want to play the French horn. French horn was fine, except I was sitting in front of my good friend who played the euphonium. And while he was going dee-da-dee-da-da, I was going um-da, um-da, um-ba-da-da-da. And I wanted to play those parts. And so I wanted to transfer to euphonium, and he said, you can't do that. I won't let you do it. He said, but what I will do is I'll let you play some of those euphonium parts on the French horn. But they're in bass clef, in C. So you'll have to learn how to transpose and do all that. I was ready to do anything to get off the afterbeats. And so this guy's name was Paul Inglefield, and he did wonderful. The band wasn't very good, but he was very good. He was a very fine musician, and he was in it for us. And it was a terrific thing. He asked one time for if anybody wanted to guest conduct a high school band. I said, I do. And there wasn't very many others that did, and so I did that. And each time I got up to do that, he would give me some suggestions, and then I'd go back and work on that, and I'd get up again, he'd give me more suggestions. So by the time I graduated from high school, I could do it. Not great, but at least better than an average person just picking up a stick. And then I went to the University of Michigan. Oh, there's an intermediate step we'll get to in a second. But I went to the University of Michigan, and as luck would have it, I got Elizabeth Green as my conducting teacher. Well, everybody else was just beginning conducting, but I'd already had all this experience. And so I could just get up and do it. And everybody else was, how does this, you know. And I've been through that because of Paul Englefield. Well, so I didn't really do much study. I mean, we got these assignments, and I got up and just did it and so forth. And one time I got up and did that, and I thought I did just fine. And Elizabeth Green said, Robert, I know what you're capable of, and don't ever stand up here prepared like that again. Well, I didn't, and I haven't. Because she said that magic thing, I know what you're capable of. It just wasn't a slap across the face. There was something there that said, I have faith in you. And I didn't want to disappoint that. I didn't want to reveal the fact that I might not have all that she thought I had, so I worked even harder. What got me to Michigan was my family didn't think I should go into music. We had some workers in the family and some lawyers and so forth, and music was important, but it was not something a grown man did for a profession. So, again, Paul Englefield, my high school band director, said there's this, and I wanted to go into music the worst way. He said, well, there's this music camp in the summer that's up in northern Michigan. Why don't you send him up there? It's called the National Music Camp at Interlochen. And it's music all day long for 8 weeks. And I know what my mother was thinking. That'll knock it out of him. So I went up there and played for the summer, and I was clearly not the best. There were lots of people there who were better than I was. And so many of those people were going to the University of Michigan, and I didn't know where to go. I looked at a lot of schools, but I had no idea what was good or bad and so forth. And I wanted to be a band conductor because I had all this cool experience with my high school. But all these really good people were going to Michigan. So I thought, well, it must be good if all these good players are going there. So I showed up in order to train myself to be a band conductor without ever knowing who the band director at the University of Michigan was.
Well, that's why most people went to Michigan, was because of Ravelli.
Right. Ravelli was probably, at that point, maybe still is, the most famous band conductor in the country. And people just flocked to him to get that kind of experience. And I just went there, and through dumb luck, there I was with Ravelli and Elizabeth Green. It was nuts.
So you went to Michigan because of your friends. You felt comfortable.
Well, yes, friends, but also people whose musicianship I respected.
Right.
They were going there, therefore I knew those groups must be good, the education must be good, or all these really good people wouldn't be going there.
So you have to tell us, what was the Ravelli introduction like when you walked into the band?
Well, yeah. In high school, I could play the French horn. I mean, for a high school kid, I was pretty good. And so I went to all-state things and was first chair in the orchestra, all-state orchestra, first chair in the all-state band, and got the ones and did all the stuff that we all do. And so I thought I was hot stuff, and so I went to Michigan, and we auditioned, and I thought I played okay at the audition. And I was walking down the street toward the rehearsal hall where they had posted the results. And some of my friends who had already seen the results kept passing me and say, oh, congratulations, you must have played great. And I thought to myself, wow, I didn't expect to be first chair right away, but it looks like that's the possibility. So I walked in and I looked at the list for the symphony band, the top band at Michigan, and I looked at the French horns, and there were 8 French horns there, and I was 8th. Impossible that I would be the last chair. And they were congratulating me because there were 3 freshmen of all the instruments who made the band. 3 freshmen. And I thought, how can this be that there are 7 better players in this one school than me? And so I went to the first rehearsal and got there early, of course, and because I wanted to warm up and be ready. And then I started hearing all these people start to play. And it wasn't just French horns, it was trumpets and trombones and clarinets and flutes and oboes. And I'd never heard playing like that in my life. It was like Gulliver's Travels. I thought I was a giant, but I was a giant in the land of midgets. And then I went to this place where all these, and that's, the education of actually hearing what a real saxophone should sound like and a real trumpet should sound like. Those sounds got in my ear and affected me enormously. And what real together musicianship should play. anyway, it was a great education.
I know your teachers had a great influence on you. Talk about Elizabeth Green a little bit, and your connection with her.
Well, I mean, I told you some about her, but she could also do everything she was teaching. She was trying to teach us to conduct a 4/4 beat within a quarter of an inch. Only she could do it. And then we did all these independent hand things. This hand does this and this hand does that. And she could do everything. And she was demanding and empathetic. She was the ideal teacher because she was totally interested in what was best for her students. I remember there was a friend of mine, Jack Biddle, who was a fellow band conductor in Michigan, later became a principal. Anyway, he and I were buddies. We were going home to Meadville for Thanksgiving. Took him home to Thanksgiving, so we were going to the airport. Well, those were in the days when you could hitchhike. I mean, you can't do that anymore, but you could then. So we were out on the main drag in Ann Arbor, hitchhiking to the Detroit airport. And this car pulls up and stops, and out pops from the window this head that belonged to Elizabeth Green. She says, "What are you boys doing?" He says, "Well, we're hitchhiking to the airport because we're going home for Thanksgiving." She says, "Well, I don't have anything to do. Why don't you get in? I'll just take you to the airport." But that was typical of her. There was one other, later on, long after she retired, maybe a few years before she died, I used to go over to visit her. She lived in Ann Arbor, and I did too, so I mean, she meant so much to me that I visited her a fair amount. And one of the early times I visited her, I noticed that she had this black and white TV. This was long since black and white went out of style. And 2 rabbit ears were sticking out. And I think there was probably aluminum foil on the rabbit ears. And then the weird thing was on these knobs, she had rubber bands on these knobs that were attached to the, I said, what are the rubber bands for? She says, well, in order to get the best picture, I've got to turn it, and I've got to keep the pressure on this knob to turn it so it gets the best picture. And so she said, I don't want to do that, so I just attach rubber bands there to keep the pressure on. I said, okay. So I went home and I called half a dozen of my friends. I said, I want $100 from you, and I want $100 from you, and I want $100. So I just went to the local place and bought a color TV and got her cable, and the TV had a tape insert on the top where you could just stick in a videotape. You didn't even have to turn it on. All you had to do was just put in the tape, and the TV turned on, and the videotape would play. I mean, fail safe. He said, oh, I can't do that. I said, well, these are the people who did it, and they wanted to do it. And I said, and the cable guy is going to be here day after tomorrow. She said, oh, I can't afford cable. I said, you won't have to. The cable is completely paid for. But it was that she was ready to do without everything, except she gave everything away. She gave herself away, was her secret. Anyway, that's enough.
Best teacher you ever had?
Oh, clearly. I mean, if you ask anybody who had her as a teacher, you say, who was the best teacher you had at the University of Michigan? Everybody would say Elizabeth Green immediately. And then you'd say, okay, who was the second best teacher you had? And then everybody would go, well, it's had a lot of good teachers. Let me think just for a minute. But there was no thinking right away on who the best teacher was. Clearly, it was Elizabeth Green.
You graduate from Michigan.
Yep.
Get that degree.
Yep.
The profession starts.
Yep.
Traction. Where do you hit the road?
Oh, I hit the road in Onstead, Michigan, town of 600.
And what did you do? Everything?
Well, nearly everything. It was one band director, taught elementary, junior high, and high school. And I also shared an apartment with a guy. They kind of hooked us up. They said this was the nicest place to stay in town. And the guy was the head basketball coach. And I was a basketball player of sorts. So I became the assistant basketball coach. Coached junior high basketball. He coached the high school basketball team. We played on the Onstead City basketball team together. I liked playing basketball. And had a great time. I mean, Onstead was really good for me. It was a time when I made a whole lot of mistakes that only I knew about. But I was trying to do it in the way it was done for me. And that was in the age, when I went to school, it was in the age, Ravelli, of course, was there. And Ravelli's, not mentors, but what's the word I'm thinking about?
Heroes?
Yeah, heroes, models is
Mentors?
the better, yeah.
Yeah.
The models for that period of time were Toscanini and Fritz Reiner and George Zell. In other words, the strong-willed maestro those were the really successful people. And I think that's in many ways why Ravelli was that same strong-willed person. And so that's the way I wanted to be. It didn't turn out that way, but that's the way I started. In my first year at Onsted, I got a Christmas present right away from the Onsted High School Band, just before they took Christmas break. And in that, there was a box, and in the box was a bright red ski sweater. Terrific, with a note in there. And the note was from the Onsted High School Band. Here is a sweater to match your temper. That, I had to back up a little bit on that because that was not what I wanted to hear. But that's what they thought I was. I mean, they knew I cared a lot, but I wasn't doing it in the way that I was really as natural to me.
I was going to say, it was unnatural for you to be that.
Yeah, but that was the model. That
Yeah.
was, I mean, I knew that was the successful way. And I grew up in the period of nice guys finish last.
Mm-hmm.
If you were tough, the tougher people were taught in junior high than elementary, and if you were tougher still, you taught in high school, and if you were tougher still, you taught in college. That was the era that happened.
Win at all costs.
Well, it was succeed at all costs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, so you spent how long at Onsted?
One lonely year. They won the
Basketball team lost it.
no. Actually, we won more. It was kind of tight. I think we won one more game than we lost. But they wanted me to stay, and in many ways, I should have stayed. I should have. I was in a hurry. I should have stayed, but they were ready to give me a perk that in normal situations you would have to be in the Onsted system a long time to get it. They were going to give me a school bus route. So I could drive a school bus every day.
That was your reward?
That was a perk. Well, you got an extra $900 for doing that. Now that doesn't sound like much, but my yearly salary at Onsted was $3,600. So I mean, money was relative, and still is, I guess. I mean, my rent, all expenses, room and board, everything, and they supplied linens and dishes and silverware and all utilities and a garage and so forth. My roommate and I each paid $25 a month. So $3,600 went a little further than it does now. And my mother was very eager to find out how I was doing because she had done a lot for me. And so we were doing the summer program, and so she called on the phone to see how I was doing. And that was in the day when still small towns had operators in the town. And so, and this is true, I'm not making this up. My telephone number was 6. So she called up the operator and she said, "I'd like number 6. And the operator said, "Do you want Mr. Dool or Mr. Reynolds?" And she said, "Reynolds." And the town operator said, "He's not home right now. He'll be home about 8:30. He's at band rehearsal."
Everybody knew everything.
Oh, man, it was something. It was a great time.
And from Onsted went to?
I went back to grad school and
Right.
I got an undergrad in music ed, and I thought that was good and great, and I wanted to do that, so I went back and got a graduate degree in performance.
With the notion of?
I always wanted to be a band conductor.
Okay.
That's what I wanted to do. But I thought the performance degree would help me in the musical way. And I actually took a performance degree in brass instruments. So I took trumpet lessons from the trumpet teacher and trombone lessons from the trombone teacher. And normal people who did that would become a brass teacher at a small college and teach all the brass. And I had an offer to do that, but I was determined to be a band conductor.
Okay, finished the graduate degree, and now we go to California.
Yeah, I would go to California. And one of the reasons I went to California is because of the strength of William Ravelli. Because not only was he a strong personality, but he was enormously influential in the band profession. And he would mention periodically during rehearsals, well, so-and-so just got to help so-and-so get a job over here, and so-and-so's really doing well over here, and they called me about this, and I got him this job here. And I thought, boy, I'm not sure that I want that, because I would want to know at the end of the profession, at the end of my time in the profession, I either made it or didn't make it on my own, not because he got me the job or kept me from getting the job, because in all honesty, he and I didn't always see eye to eye. One short story on that.
Please.
I was president of Kappa Kappa Psi, the honorary band fraternity, and we would vote on new members coming in and so forth and so on. And Ravelli was the sponsor. And so at one point he said, I think these people should come in. And I said, well, yeah, 2 or 3 of those I think are great. But I think the other 4 or 5 or 6 really aren't outstanding band members of our band. They're good, but they're not outstanding. They may be outstanding next year. He said, Reynolds, if that was the way it was going to be done, you would have never gotten in Kappa Kappa Psi. And I said, then I shouldn't have gotten in Kappa Kappa Psi. So it was, anyway, we didn't always see eye to eye, let me just say that.
So you went to on your own to Anaheim, to California.
Yeah, I went to California. I applied for jobs, and I was actually ready to interview, and did interview for a job in Long Beach. Because they said they were going to save this job for me until I got there. They couldn't give a job to somebody without a personal interview. But they would save that job for me because my credentials look good. So I went out there thinking, I can interview, okay. So I got there, and the guy said, yes, we're offering you the job. It's a 6-month substitute job till the regular band conductor gets out of the service. There I was in California with a 6-month substitute job. I said, no, thank you. And I walked out, no prospect, nothing. So I called education things, and I said, where would you apply? They said, well, we hear there's some jobs open in Orange County. So I said, how would I find out? They said, well, call the music supervisor of Orange County. So I looked in the phone book and called a woman I still remember, Irene Sheffley. I never met her, but I remember her name. And she said, yes, there's a job at Anaheim High School open. And they were looking for a band conductor who could also teach language arts, English, speech. And I was a speech minor in college. So that qualified me. So I started teaching at Anaheim High School and was there for a while.
And then went to Long Beach.
Then became the assistant at Long Beach State.
And who was the band director? You were
John Green, who was great. He was the closest person to Abraham Lincoln I've ever met. He looked like him, he acted like him, he was wise and intelligent and musical. Just one short story about John. At the beginning of every year, people would come in for the marching band and so forth and come into the room. And before they started any rehearsal, he went around the room and introduced everybody. He would name them by name and where they went to school, because he had met them over the summer, and he just remembered those people. It was a tour de force. The reason I got the assistant's job is because he was elected chairman of the music department. He had been doing the band by himself, and he was elected chairman, so they hired him as an assistant while he was the chairman.
And how long was it before that transition came?
Too soon. Well, John then became clearly a wonderful administrator. Went to West Texas State as the dean or director of the school, and which left a band. And he left in the middle of the year, which left a band director opening. And I was like 29 years old, and he had developed this quite good program at Long Beach, and they didn't want to give it to some kid. And I had a couple friends on the faculty who really helped me, stood by me and said, this is the guy we should keep this guy and have him do it. So I did it, and it was difficult. I remember the students were almost the same age I was. I mean, a lot of them were, 23, 24, and I was 29. I mean, what's that about? I remember one of them, who's remained a close friend of mine by the name of Leo Potts, a wonderful saxophone player, came up to me one time and said, fortunately I took it right, you should take conducting lessons. I could have taken it the other way around, but I said, well, I don't know. Where would I go to take conducting? I said, well, Zubin Mehta is the music director of the LA Philharmonic. So I wrote Zubin Mehta. I would like to take conducting lessons, and I got a letter back from the second or third assistant to the assistant manager saying, Mr. Maida does not give conducting lessons. Well, not to be dissuaded, I said, well, I'd like to come to a rehearsal. So they gave me permission to come to rehearsal. And then I said, well, I'd like to find out what the music is that's being rehearsed. And then I'd like to come to another rehearsal, and then another rehearsal. And then finally they just gave me carte blanche to come to any rehearsal. Well, then I needed to have, I wanted to know the schedule of the music, you know, if what music was being done, so I would go with the score. In fact, I studied with Zubin Mehta. It's just that Zubin Mehta doesn't know that.
Your friend did you a favor by saying...
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I watched Eugene Ormandy conduct, and the thing I learned from those guys is they just stood up there, and the score was put up here as a reference. And they just conducted, and it wasn't like they were memorizing everything, but they knew it so well that it was like somebody reading a script from a teleprompter. I mean, they were looking at the players and listening like crazy. And I thought to myself, these guys are doing, you know, a concert or two a week, and they're doing it like this all the time. If they can do a concert or two a week, I can do one piece a semester like that. And so then I set about to do one piece a semester. Then it was one piece a concert, and then so gradually, but they were the model for me. I mean, that was huge.
That shifted your whole...
Oh, yeah, yep.
Great. Okay, let's go to Wisconsin.
Yeah, we played an ABA convention with Long Beach. The ABA had a convention in Long Beach, and our band played and did okay. And one of the people who guest conducted our band was Ray Dvorak, who was the director of bands at the University of Wisconsin. And we hosted him and so forth. And at one point he said, well, this is my last year, I'm retiring from the University of Wisconsin. And of course those were the days when you didn't have internet, you couldn't find out where every job in the world was opening and so on. It just was word of mouth kind of thing. So I thought, well, you know, maybe I've been here at Long Beach for half a dozen years, maybe I could try for that. And so I did, I applied for it.
And moved there, you were what, then 34?
34.
34?
Yeah. And what happened before that, the Long Beach band had also played a CBDNA convention in Provo. And Ravelli was there doing, I want to say, an intercollegiate honor band or something like that. And he came to our concert, and he saw me after the concert, and he shook out his hand, and he said, that was very orchestral. And I thought, okay, I appreciate your saying it that way. I realize you didn't like the concert, but I appreciate your being nice about it. I didn't say that, but that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was the head of the music department at Wisconsin called Ravelli and said, who should we hire? And he said, I just heard this great band in Provo, Utah. And so I went back for an interview. And you know how interviews can be very difficult. This interview started out with the search committee, and one of the members of the search committee looked at the sheet, my resume, and said, is everything on this resume correct? I said, well, I think so. He said, well, in that case, happy birthday to you. And so the whole thing started with the search committee singing happy birthday, which of course broke the ice, and then it was just a discussion. It was very helpful, I've got to say, because I was very nervous.
When you went to Wisconsin, did you think that was going to be home for a while?
Absolutely. I thought Long Beach was going to be home.
I got it.
I mean, I never really was on the make for another job.
Right. So, I mean, everybody, now the anxious part we all want to know is Wisconsin to Michigan. I mean, you're back home again. You've made the whole circle from back to your alma mater.
Let me back up to just a story or two at Wisconsin.
Please.
One, and I won't go too far back into it, but one of the pieces we did at Wisconsin with a special study group was the Berg Chamber Concerto for violin, piano, and winds. Now, the Berg Chamber Concerto is a very complicated issue, very complicated piece, and I didn't know the piece. And here I was, a Big Ten conductor, and the first time I looked at that piece and heard a recording while looking at the score, I got lost. How could I get lost? I was a Big Ten band conductor. I was just very happy that there was no one else in the room. It was just me, but I knew how desperate that was. And so I studied like crazy. And then the guy who played the violin had studied a while with a guy by the name of Rudolf Kolisch, who married Schoenberg's daughter, played the first performance of the Berg Chamber Concerto with Berg conducting. And then my friend said, you need to go to Boston and talk to Rudolf Kolisch about this piece. So I did. I mean, I'm always someone who kind of puts my head in the lion's mouth and hopes that it doesn't come down on me. So I went there, and a few days before I went there, I had this dream or nightmare. And I was arrested and brought before a tribunal in this dream. And the tribunal was Arnold Schoenberg, Alban Berg, and Anton Webern. And I was charged with attempting a performance of the Berg Chamber Concerto without the proper personal preparation. And if found innocent, found prepared, I would be allowed to continue with the preparation. If found guilty, I would be exposed to the world as a musical fraud. And unfortunately, I woke up before the verdict.
You don't know how it came out.
But I went and I had this session with clearly I was very nervous, because it was like going to, Mount Rushmore to see, the great person who knew the piece inside and out. And I had studied like crazy. I mean, by that time, I knew this piece really. And I had analyzed it and do all the inversion and retrograde, and I knew everything. And I got there and we started talking, and it became clear that I knew the piece better than he did. Except he knew the music. Because he was saying, now this is a waltz. We're getting into this waltz, and the waltz just has to go chick, 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 chick. So he was telling me how the music should go. And I had the analysis down. I was still in band director mode. And he was in music mode. Another huge lesson.
I was just going to say another
jump.
Major jump.
Yeah, anyway, that's my Wisconsin story. There's a lot of Wisconsin stuff, but. Oh, wait. One more.
Please.
When I auditioned for Wisconsin, it was after school was out. And so they didn't have a band there. So they sent a faculty member to Long Beach when we were still in session. And they sent John Barrows. Are any horn players in here? Well, John Barrows is a Mount Rushmore figure in the horn world. And they thought, if John Barrows says this guy's okay, he's okay. So I picked John Barrows up at the airport. And on the way back, I said, well, what are you going to be looking for? Thinking I could design something that he would like to see. And he said, to tell you the truth, I'm probably not going to be looking at you much at all. I went. He said, I can tell what's been going on by looking at the students.
He was right.
Yep. The other question I had for him was, what kind of band conductor are you looking for? He said, well, I don't really know. I can just tell you, we're not looking for a band man.
And what did he mean by that?
They were looking for a musician.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
And that was still early enough that there was this big band thing that has broken down some over the years. I think there's still too much of that, but it's still there. It's not there nearly as much as it used to be. We've grown a little bit out of that. Okay, the Michigan thing you wanted to get
Well, I mean, Ravelli, Michigan, an institution, he passes it to Mr. Cavender.
Right.
And, I mean, everybody, that was going to be it. And
Right.
All of a sudden.
Well, yeah, that didn't work as well as people hoped it would.
Right. But following Ravelli, I mean, even though there's a buffer in there.
Yeah.
Your teacher.
Well, in all honesty, I interviewed twice at Michigan. I interviewed at their request, went over and conducted the group, and interviewed with people and talked to people and so forth and so on. And they offered me the job, and then I called them up and said, I've got to come back and talk to you again. Because what I was doing the first interview was presenting myself in the best possible way so I could get the job. And then I thought, they don't know who they're getting. They don't know who they're getting. So I went back and said I need to talk to all these people all over again. So then I had to say, I'm a different person, because I was worried that they were thinking they were going to get William Ravelli Jr. And I was not at all like that. I mean, and that was, so they needed to know, and they were very welcoming. I mean, they were ready to have me do what I wanted to do. You just do what you do. Ravelli did what he did. You do what you do. That was essentially the thing. The other thing that almost stopped me was my office was to be in Ravelli Hall, which is now the home of the marching band down near the stadium and so on. And I said, I can't do that. I said, why? You've got a big office down here. You know, you've got all the staff, et cetera, et cetera. I said, but I can't do that. I said, all the musicians, all the wind faculty, all the composers and so forth, they're up in the School of Music building. And the associate dean who was talking to me said, you mean you're going to turn down the director of bands at the University of Michigan because of where your office is? And one of the few times in my life I said the right thing. I said, you mean you're not going to hire the person you want because of where the office is? So we came to an agreement about the offices. So my office was in the School of Music, and that's where it was. I've spent a lot of time at Ravelli Hall, too.
All of our audience and all of the people who are watching this DV have taken a job that somebody else had and gone through the transition time.
Yep.
Following in those footsteps, what was that transition like?
Oh, piece of cake.
Next.
No, it was hard. And I was asked to go back to Wisconsin, and I thought about it for a moment. And before I took the job at Michigan, I had long talks with myself because I'd started doing something in Wisconsin that we were making progress. It wasn't great, but it was good. It was very good. And I thought, what I'm doing at Wisconsin, I'm building this house. I'm making this happen with a lot of work from students and faculty and so forth. But this, when it gets done, it's going to be something that I will have contributed to the University of Wisconsin. If I go to Michigan, I'm going to live in Ravelli's house. Now, it's going to be a much nicer house. It's going to be bigger, and et cetera, but it's not going to be my house. So that was a big decision on my part to do that. And it came down to the fact that I thought, at the end of my professional life, I don't want to say, I wonder what would have happened had I gone to Michigan. I just didn't want to deal with that question. And it took, in all honesty, probably 4, 5, 6, maybe more years before things began to cook at Michigan.
Style of teaching were
Very
dramatically different.
Right.
180 degrees.
I had a delegation of students at the end of my first year come to me and say, you need to change the way you're doing this, because we all think your standards are too low. You're not coming down on us like this. You know, when things aren't right, you're not yelling at us. You're not holding our feet to the fire. I said, well, that's not the way I do it. I finally said, come back and see me in a year. And if things are still the way you talk about them, we can have a more serious conversation. But it needs more time. To do it in the other way takes longer, but it comes from the inside out. You deal with music on the inside, and then gradually the outside begins to bloom. It's much faster to get the bloom if you do it by working on the outside of the music, getting it right. You play this way, you play this way, play it higher, play it lower. It takes a lot longer to say, the three of you need to get together and tune this. But over time, if those three get together and tune it periodically, then they're going to learn how to do that on their own. But it takes longer.
So it's a different creative mindset, or a mindset of working for the student or the musician himself or herself than they were used to.
It was just different from the way they were used to.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would characterize it the way you did, but it was definitely different. I remember that we took the band on tour one time to Upper Peninsula and so forth in Michigan, and we played our last concert of the tour at Interlochen. They have a nice auditorium there on the stage, and we knew a lot of people, and the people in the band knew a lot of people. So after the concert was over, we were standing around. A couple high school band directors came up to me and said, "Man," he said, "I have never heard a band play that well in tune. How do you do it?" And I said to him, "I have no idea." And there was a clarinet. The guy who played principal clarinet in the band, who's now the clarinet teacher at Oberlin, was standing here, and he said, "I know exactly how it's done. Everything in the rehearsal is done through listening. We listen to play together. We listen for releases, for attacks, for intonation, for balance. It's all listening. You're not telling us to do play higher, play lower. We're telling ourselves. You may just point out that there's an intonation issue here, but before you solve it, you ask us to solve it. And by the nature of all that listening that goes on constantly, the group just gets gradually better and better and better.
I think
It almost seems too easy, doesn't it? I'll tell you one thing, well, just a moment on intonation. If you want to improve intonation immediately, and you're having a problem with a chord or a unison or whatever, just ask the people to sing that note. Because if they get the sound in their ear, it's going to come out the horn.
That whole concept that one of the ways you approach it, and one of the ways they were used to approaching it, I wonder, when they came in and said, if you come down on us, and then that will solve all the problems, that is the quick fix, always.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And putting the responsibility back on the musicians themselves gives them ownership of. Doesn't that open a whole new landscape for music then, where they begin to express themselves because of that responsibility?
Yeah, but it was very gradual. This whole thing happened over a very gradual and fairly lengthy period. By the end of the second year, then things were beginning to cook.
Share the story about going to Italy, the opera. When did you feel the band was yours? You said, now this is mine.
9 years after I was at Michigan, I felt I was finally in charge of the band. 9 years.
Yeah.
Well, Ravelli had taken the group to Carnegie Hall, to Russia, to Europe, to whatever. He built the band. There was no question about that. And so I had done nothing except conduct a few concerts. Mm-hmm. And so finally, when we actually took the band on a 6-week tour of Europe and played the premiere of an opera for La Scala Opera and did those things, that I felt somehow I had become a member of the conducting of the Michigan band. Then I felt that I could realistically claim leadership of the band. Mm-hmm. Up to that point, I was kind of just a caretaker of somebody else's band.
While we're still in the Michigan era,
yep.
Some students that you had that were incredible parts of that whole journey.
Well, it wasn't just at Michigan. I've been very fortunate my whole life. I'm kind of known as a really good conducting teacher. And I'll tell you the secret of that is have really good conducting students. And so I admitted only the very best students. So a couple students that I had at Long Beach, in that Long Beach band of years and years ago, was Alan McMurray, who's the director of bands of Colorado, and Eugene Corporon, who I'm sure all of you know who that is. And then at Michigan, students that I admitted and claimed that I, quote, taught, and my teaching style was I admitted the best students, gave them opportunities to conduct, and then we talked about it afterwards. And that was about it. We just had discussions about it. But they were already talented. I was just kind of a source on the way to development. But Jerry Junkin was a student there. Larry Ratcliffe was a student there. Bob Ponto from Oregon was a student there. Eric Wilson from Baylor, who's at Baylor now. Dennis Glocke at Penn State. Glenn Adsit and Mark Scatterday, who's the conductor of the Eastman Wind Ensemble. So I had some pretty fancy students.
Eric, New Mexico, Eric Rombach.
Oh, Eric Rombach. I've 3 or 4 people have been president of CBDNA. One of my proudest moments is when one of my students gave the baton when he retired from being president of CBDNA to another of my students who was becoming president of CBDNA. I felt like a proud father.
You were a proud father at that point.
I also had some really terrific assistants.
Speak to that.
Well, I was always interested in hiring an assistant who was really good. Now, that may sound like an obvious thing, but I don't think a lot of people do that. I think a lot of people hire an assistant who will get along with everybody, who will not challenge me, and certainly not be as good as I am. But I thought that was nuts, because if I hire an assistant and they do great, it reflects it's not only great for the students in the ensemble, it makes me look like a hero. So I hired Carl St. Clair. He was the assistant band director at Michigan. So was Larry Ratcliffe. Dennis Glocke was an assistant. Gary Lewis. Kevin Sedotol.
Lots of them.
Lots of people who were great.
At the end of the career in Michigan, did you think that was it? That, we're going to... It's important you share the story about what Frank Battisti said to you about retirement, because I just think that's the greatest line in the world.
Well, first of all, I felt very relieved to be at the University of Michigan. Relieved in the sense that because I'd had all these really great students, I thought a lot of these students were going to get, ensembles that were better than mine, that were going to have jobs better than mine. And that didn't seem right somehow, that the teacher was going to be in a secondary position. So I was very relieved when I went to the University of Michigan, because for me, that was the ultimate job. And Don Hunsberger and I have talked about that. For Don Hunsberger, the Eastman job was the ultimate job for him, and for me, the Michigan job was the ultimate job. I'm not sure either of us would have been as successful had we been at the other place, which is an interesting thought. Anyway, the Frank Battisti story. Frank Battisti one time, this was a number of years ago, said to me, it's better to retire 5 years early than 5 minutes late. Because if you retire early and you can still do it, you get a celebration. You get a celebration either way, but in one way they're celebrating your career, and the other way they're celebrating the fact that you're finally gone. One celebration you're invited to, the other one you're not.
So let's talk about your friend Larry Livingston, who says, here's a chance to snag somebody.
Yep. Come for 1 year. I'm going to be dean for just 1 more year, and I don't want to hire a wind ensemble conductor at USC. I want the new dean to be able to hire the kind of person he wants. I don't know whether he wants to hire an older established person or a younger person, or et cetera. So just come and do this for a year. You're retiring. So I said, sounds like fun. As long as I don't have to do committees, reports, auditions, grades, meetings. There was all the stuff that can just weigh you down. If I don't have to do that, I'm okay. And so I went out there for a year. And I only wanted, because I didn't want another full-time job. So I said, he said, the minimum I think you can be here for is 2 weeks. I said, I'll do 2 weeks. And 2 weeks, 4 times a year. So he said, well, we'll have to have somebody rehearse the group. So they hired a person by the name of Sharon Lavery to rehearse the group, and she's fantastic. Better than that. And so what I'm doing now with my life is I am establishing for the band conducting world the definition of what a job should be. The job should have no administrative responsibilities to it. Somebody else should rehearse the group and do all the heavy lifting on the rehearsals, and then you just go in at the end for the final 2 weeks, half dozen rehearsals, and the concert, and all the players can really play. And then in addition to that, they pay me more than I'm worth to do it. So what's not to like?
So that help us out for a year is turned in now to...
Well, what happened was they couldn't find a dean for that first year, so Larry was dean for the second year. So he said, would you do it again? So I did it again. Then the new dean came on and said, I hear this is working. So why do we want to change this? So he said, but we can't give you an extended contract. The longest we can do that is 3 years. We can renew it. So I'm finishing my 8th year of that 1 year job.
With still more to go.
Yeah, and it's just going to continue as long as they feel good about it and I feel good about it. I mean, I don't know how long this is going to go, but they essentially told me as long as I want to do it. So as long as my health holds out in my mind and ears and so forth.
They can't fire you.
No, it's another story.
I think what we'll do is take a break right now. Let's now begin to talk about the signature style that you're known for, and the way you teach and the way you conduct, and that interaction, the space between you and the ensemble and so forth. And if you could start it out with talking about the Richland story as a setup for technique, musicianship, teacher, artist, so forth, that comparison, cognitive, affective.
The Richland College story. Well, I was hired to be a clinician, the only clinician at Richland College, which is a two-year college outside of Dallas. And it was like a pre-festival moment. So bands could come in, bring their band to Richland College and play for however long their pieces lasted, 20 minutes or 25 minutes. And then the rest of the hour, I would work with them on those pieces. There was no rating or anything like that. I was just there to help. And one of the groups, and there were a lot of great groups. I mean, as you would anticipate in Texas, they have a lot of great groups there. And one of the best ones came and played the transcription, the Mark Hinesley transcription of the Academic Festival Overture of Brahms. And during the course of all these groups playing, I would make some notes to myself, well, we need to work on this, we need to spend some time working on this and some time. And as this group played the Academic Festival, I was not writing anything down. I mean, everything sounded fantastic. It was just one great thing after another. And the horn sounded great, and the saxophones sounded like saxophones. I mean, it was fantastic. At the end of it, I got up and I said, I'm not really going to be able to help you at all, because I think what you're doing with this is fantastic. So for the rest of the time we've got, why don't we just explore some other ways of looking at this piece? Brahms arranged this college song into the Academic Festival Overture, and so there are other ways to do this. So I went ahead and we worked with different interpretations and speeds and all kinds of balances and did all kinds of cool things, and the students were right with me. I mean, they were enjoying it too, and I was enjoying it too. And I thought, well, I escaped that one when I didn't know what I was going to say. It worked out. And then on the way out, the band conductor passed by me and said, you should know that you were tampering with the George Zell interpretation. Now, what was that about? What he had done, he'd taught them everything. And then he had replicated the exact nuances of the George Zell interpretation in the same way that my Aunt Gertrude used to work conscientiously in painting by the numbers. So she'd got this painting by the numbers and done, this was number 27, which was light green in here, and then 13, which was a little off shade of yellow over here, and after she got the whole thing done, it looked like art. But she knew it wasn't art. It was pretend, and that's what they were doing. As good as it was only technical perfection. And so it floored me what he said, that somebody else could listen so hard to an interpretation to replicate that and not think about what it should be for him or for his group. I keep some quotes in my wallet, and maybe now's the time to get one of them out. And they're there all the time. Some weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, I think it was a couple of months ago, there was, if I can find it, oh, there it is. There was an article in the New York Times. I read the New York Times mostly on Sundays. And there was an article by Michael Tilson Thomas about his experiences with Leonard Bernstein. And this was the one I clipped out of the New York Times and then put some plastic around it so it wouldn't deteriorate. And they're talking, and Michael Tilson Thomas is talking about Mahler's Fifth Symphony with Leonard Bernstein. So Tilson Thomas says, after one of my early performances of Mahler's Fifth, the conversation went like this, from Tilson Thomas. What do you think about the Adagietto, which is the slow movement of the Fifth Symphony? Bernstein. What do I think? I think that when you've made up your mind about what it really means to you, it won't matter what I or anyone else thinks. You'll just know. And that's the way the interpretation goes. And that's why you study, to come up to do your own feeling about how this is played. I don't know whether you know the name of Bruce Adolph. Does that name ring a bell to anybody? He's an author, composer. I've got a quote here somewhere from him. It speaks to the same issue. I could find it. Yes. Yes, here it is. Bruce Adolph, about interpretation. When a musician has discovered the essence of a work, identifies with it, embodies it, then he does not think that the performance is an interpretation. It is the piece as the composer meant it to be. An interpretation is what other musicians do. So you've got to come to grips with, if the composer walks in the room and says, oop, they're doing my piece. I've had several experiences like this, and fortunately most of them good, one of them not, and I'll tell you which one that was. But my first one was with Aaron Copland. Now, how would you like to be conducting the second performance of Emblems? In other words, I didn't have anything to go on except the score. And Copland was behind me. And I got to this one section, and I was going a different speed than was marked slightly. I didn't bend it out of shape or anything, but it was definitely not the same tempo marking. So I turned around to him, so he would know that I knew. And I said, you know, I'm going a little slower speed because it just feels right to me. But if you want me to go the faster speed, the speed that's marked, I'll be happy to do that. He said, well, if I were conducting it, I'd go at the faster speed. But I don't want you to go at the faster speed. Because it meant something to me to be at the speed we were. And it wasn't so far out of shape that it was offensive to him. That's one of the better stories. The one that's not as good is a guy that I've grown to know and like, and he and I get along great. It's just going to sound crazy because people don't think that anybody gets along with him, and that's Gunther Schuller. By the way, Gunther Schuller has probably the best set of ears of anybody I know. Well, second best of anybody I know in the music world. Anyway, we were doing a piece of his called Meditation. And in the middle of the piece called Meditation, there's a direct quote from the opening of Wagner, Tristan and Isolde. Boo-dee-da, famous chord. And usually when that's done, you kind of hold back. Ba-dee-doo-wah. And so he was standing right there, and I was conducting, and when I did that, he said, stop, why are you slowing down? I said, well, clearly this is a direct quote from the Wagner, and the traditional interpretation is that you kind of hold back before you get to the crucial chord. He said, if I'd wanted you to slow down, I would have written a retard. Okay. But I won't risk that. My other funny story is with Bill Bolcom, who I think does have the greatest set of ears ever. He did a piece for my retirement concert, just as a gift, called Song. We did it with Charlie's band. And we were rehearsing, and Bill came in finally after we prepared it, and he came in the rehearsal, and I said, I've made a few changes in it. He said, really? I said, yeah. I said, well, we'll try. He said, well, we'll try it, and then, you know, let me hear what you're doing. So we made it. I mean, I changed a few little things here, and not many, and I didn't change harmony or melody or anything like that. And at the end of the time we went through it, he said, could you come to my office tomorrow and bring your score? I thought, okay, I know, all right, you didn't like it, I'm going to be reprimanded, and you're nice enough not to do this in front of the band. And I went to his office, the score, and opened the door ready to be, said, what are you doing to my music? But that's not what happened. What happened was, I want you to tell me everything you did so I can write it in my score. Mm. Because a composer, can I use this?
Sure.
This is what we got. This is music as it sounds. Okay? Over here, and there's like a wall here. And we as conductors are on this side. And the composer is on this side of the wall. Composer is trying to, this is what he wants. And the composer is trying to figure out how to write that down so he can communicate that to the interpreter. So he's got this language of, volume and notes and crescendos and diminuendos and dynamics and all kinds of speed and everything else. So he writes these things in here. And we on the other side, it's almost like Sherlock Holmes. We get this as a clue. And we're trying to figure out, what did this composer mean by that? And he's doing the clue in reverse. He's saying, I've got to write this down so that it'll be completely understood by these people over here on the other side of the wall. And so what we're trying to do is not just interpret this, not just get exactly what is written and that's it. We need to find out what we believe was in the composer's ear and heart and mind, why they wrote this and this dynamic and mezzo forte with an accent and so on, what that was all about. That's our job, not just to, we are much more than a contractor. A contractor takes an architect's drawings and reproduces it exactly. They are not interpreting, I think this wall, if it just moved and did a little bit different shape over here, I think it would be better. Contractors don't do that. They do it exactly the way the architect designed it. But that's not our job. Our job is to figure out what the composer wanted to do and then replicate that. And your vision of that will be different from mine and different from the composer. And sometimes the composer just writes the piece and puts it out there to see what will happen. As Mozart said, the best things in music are not found in the notes. They're found in the communication in our hearts and so forth about that.
Can you, because there'll be many people watching this who are playing Go Tell Aunt Rhody,
Sure.
and is this applicable, transferable?
You don't have to wait for the group to be perfect before you put the music in. It's like you don't wait, until you're grown, until you're 21 years old before you begin to feel things. This all happens gradually and together. So you can play Go Tell Aunt Rhody in the same way with your group. Playing music is a lot like talking. So when you talk, you're trying to convey a meaning. And when you play the music, you're trying to convey a meaning. It's like saying, I like to be here in Chicago. Those are the words, those are the notes. I like to be here in Chicago. So what you do is you don't say, I'm going to pronounce these words properly. I like to be here in Chicago. That means nothing. You could say, I like to be here in Chicago. 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 All those things mean something different. And the music is the same way. You've got to figure out what that music means to you and how it's going to happen. And it can happen with Go Tell Aunt Rhody. You don't have to wait for the Hindema Symphony to make that happen.
That's the point. This is embrace. It's global. We can put our arms around all of it from the very first note.
Yeah. And you don't want to wait until it's perfect. You're not trying to create perfection. You're trying to create musical communication. The purpose of music is to communicate from soul to soul. There are very few things in the schools that do what music does. The schools are primarily set up to educate people objectively. So you've got science and math and English and language and very few, because there are two kinds of knowledge. There's objective knowledge and intuitive knowledge. In the schools, most of what happens in the schools, it happens with objective knowledge. So we learn things, we learn facts, we learn history and so forth, and that's objective knowledge. But when you make the really important decisions of your life, you do it and you trust your gut. Now what is that? That's intuition or informed intuition, because you've built up a series of fantastic experiences, and a lot of that, you sensitize that intuition through music. And so there should be more music. What was it, Socrates is that, or Plato? I can't remember which. So that if the curriculum were to be reduced to two things, it should be mathematics and music. Again, the objective and the intuitive. So that's what we're trying to do. And so all that happens early on when you play Three Blind Mice or whatever the first tune is.
Talk about your analogy to poetry.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, you know that I've told you the reason for making music is to make music. And so instead of making music, let's transform ourselves from musicians to poetry readers. So what's the goal of reading a poem? What's the goal of a poetry reader? It seems obvious that the goal is to communicate the meaning that the author wanted you to communicate that the poem had to offer to the listener. That seems pretty clear, doesn't it? The goal is not to pronounce every word in the poem correctly. And yet that's what bands do so well, is pronounce the notes correctly without thinking. So if there are no dynamics in the piece, it's just played straight. Now that's kind of dumb. I like it because music, the notation of music is not very definite. In fact, I've got a quarrel with composers, and I've brought it to several composers' attention, I should say, because they write dynamics. Let me back up. Mozart writes dynamics in a certain way. Mozart, everything is forte, or everything is piano, or mezzo forte. And then it's up to the interpreter to balance that. Okay? Now we have composers who are alive today that are trying to help the band conductor balance the piece. And so the composer will write for low D on the flute, which is hard to project. He'll write forte or fortissimo in order for it to be heard. And then he'll write pianissimo for the trumpet, so the trumpet won't overbalance the flute. Now we look at that and think, my heavens, the flute has got to play, 8 times louder than the trumpet. The composer's not thinking that. He just wants it in balance. If the composers would just get together and write the dynamics and let us deal with the balance, then I would have a good idea of what they know about. But it's a big mystery now when they start, quote, helping us with the balance. Anyway, I didn't mean to get off the subject of that.
Talk about, in terms of rehearsal, the objective.
Well, the object of rehearsal is to bring the music to life. But I also give some lectures to even the advanced students. The real object in a rehearsal is to do everything a player cannot do on his own. So they can't tune with other players on their own. They can't play in balance with other players on their own. They can't get releases with other players on their own. It's all the things with other players. That's what rehearsals are for. Rehearsals are not for practicing the part, for getting the part better. That's not it at all. It's for doing all those things that they can't do on their own. And so the players have to come prepared to the rehearsal. That's their job. And then we can rehearse. And I tell them, anytime we're rehearsing things that have to do with your personal preparation, we're not rehearsing the right things. Now, we might have to do that because you're not personally prepared. But then usually I'll stop and say, third clarinets, when will that be ready? Will be ready next Tuesday? Yeah. Okay, next Thursday. Next Thursday. Next Thursday, be ready. And I'll make myself a note, and then next Thursday, I'm sure to come back to that, because if I don't, I've taught them that I'm not serious about it.
How many of you have ever played under his baton? Here's what I hear from students in honor bands or all state bands. It was different. It was incredible. I came away a different person, even though it may have been some of the same music they've played before. When you stand in front of a group like that, where is your mind during rehearsal, during concert? How does that shift?
Well, yeah, music has to do with sensing, and the players and the conductor. Because you're trying to sense what needs work, what the pacing is. Did I work too long with the third clarinets on this? Do we need to move ahead with this? How's the balance here? Am I hearing this? So the thing that defeats us, mostly conductors, is thinking. If we think too much, we put on the back burner the sensing part of what we do. And sensing is what music is about, not thinking. So that's where the issue is with sensing and thinking. You have to think as much as necessary, but I hope that's not very much at all. I mean, you might have to get to a point when you've got 3 people doing a fermata, and so you have to remember how to do that, or you're going to conduct in 7/8 here, and you have to. But mostly, it's when you conduct, you shouldn't be thinking about conducting. The gestures should just be coming out. I mean, I'm doing hand gestures all the time. I'm not thinking about these hand gestures, and when you talk, you do hand gestures, and yours are different from mine. And so we just use our own. So the thinking aspect is very crucial to be made as small as possible. Now, the difference in a rehearsal and a concert is that during rehearsals, I try to think as little as possible, but I still have to think, should I stop for this? Are they going to get this on their own? Oh, that's the 3rd time that piccolo and the E-flat clarinet haven't played in tune. I better solve that. So my mind is in evaluation mode. And the more in evaluation mode, the less it is sensing. The more you're thinking, the less your intuitive sense is working. But in a concert, and so for me in rehearsals, it usually goes maybe 45% minimum of sensing up to maybe 85% sensing. And the reverse then would be true of how much I'm thinking and evaluating. In a concert, I try to do as little evaluating as possible, to the point where I've had people come up to me at the end of a concert and say, I'm really sorry what happened at letter C. I don't know what happened. And I will say, oh, that's okay. I have no idea what they're talking about. Because I'm in forward motion. I've already gone, because when we conduct, we're in 3 places at once. We're listening to the music as it's being played, and that's one place we are. We're evaluating how that was. So in a sense, we're behind the music, making an evaluation. We're also preparing the next musical issue. So we're in these 3 places at once, and we kind of fluctuate back and forth between those. In a concert, I try to be forward of the music nearly all the time. This is the way I want it. This is the way this sound feels right here. And then I'm on to the next sound. And so somebody will come in with a clam or an E-flat instead of an E natural, and I will be on to the next thing.
You just came from Carnegie Hall working with the collegiate group.
Right.
And can you share with us what you told them that's going to be different in the concert?
Oh, yeah. Well, and I did this at Michigan too, particularly in the first couple rows. Because what happens to me in a concert is very often I will get, this is going to sound a little weird, I don't mean to make it, I kind of get possessed by the music. And so the music will go, and so very often in a rehearsal, I won't do it to that extent because I'm partially in evaluation mode. But in the concert, I will get possessed by the music, and if a freshman or something hasn't seen that, they're going to go, whoa, what's going on here? And so I kind of warn them that this is about to happen. But and I try to do that regularly in rehearsals too. I try not to make, okay, all rehearsals are preparations for the concert. I mean, rehearsals have to be concerts also. You have to really make music every rehearsal. You can't just be teaching in the rehearsal. You can't be teaching only to skills. There are 2 things about what we do. There's the skill aspect and there's the intuitive musical aspect. And I think band folks, more than any other conducting profession, teach to the skills the most. We're continually trying to increase the skill, get to the next most difficult piece, raise these people up, and there's everything right with that. But at some point, they have to use those skills in rehearsals, and we have to make the music come alive with the skills that are there.
Why do you think we work on those skills so much? What's the payoff?
Well, I wish I had a better answer for this, but I really think often people work almost totally on technique because they're afraid, personally, to reveal their own inner aesthetic, musical, sensing weaknesses. So rather than reveal their own weakness in that area, they will work on the technical things, which makes them feel better, and they're better at it. It's the same kind of people who spend more time at the computer than they do at the score.
So to make yourself vulnerable, you have a firewall then for people to read.
Yeah, and we should really want them to read into us, but we keep this protected. Maybe we grew up with parents and grandparents and so forth that, would say, don't, you feel to them. I remember my mother telling me continually that you have too many highs and too many lows. You should be a little bit more in the middle. And I've always had too many highs and too many lows. When I feel really good, I feel great. When I feel terrible, I feel really bad.
Talk about the new director at the LA Philharmonic that you said that you've been visiting, and his youth, lack of experience compared to what he brings.
Well, you've got to understand, if you're conducting a professional orchestra of a lot of old, seasoned, what should I say, cynical musicians, and they've played the Beethoven symphonies a bazillion times, and you walk in and you're 28 years old, you're going to command the respect of those people? Oh, come on. But he goes at it like, this is the way these symphonies go. I don't know how you've been playing it before, but this is the way we're playing it now. He's got passion and musicianship. Gustavo Dudamel is the real deal. Make no mistake about that. He's not some kid flash in the pan, star. He's the real deal as far as a communicative musician. And he's not afraid to let people know how he feels about the music. And he's got one ability that I wish I had. I'm jealous of this ability, and that is he can go completely full out with passion and energy and still hear objectively. Normally, the more I put out my physical self and my energy and my musical projection, the less well I can hear objectively. Maybe you've had this experience. You sit in front of somebody else's band, you can hear everything that's going wrong. You stand up and conduct your own group, and you can't hear nearly as many things. That's because we all feel, and we should feel, that we need to project our musical energy onto the group. But when you're doing that, it's very difficult to hear objectively, but Gustavo Dudamel can do that. And I've seen it in rehearsals, and it's a great, I don't think he knows he has it.
I was going to say, a natural gifted that just innately he can.
And some people are just more gifted than others. I mean, I was talking about Gunther Schuller earlier. We had him on campus one time, and we were doing one of his complicated pieces, and cacophony was going on. Still a great piece, and he stopped and he said, no, there's some clarinet playing E flat instead of E natural. I thought to myself, oh, come on. You can't hear that. You're just impressing us with some. So, okay, don't do that anymore, clarinets. Off we go. And just before I started, a hand came up from the middle of the second clarinet section that said, it was me. He had heard that.
He heard it.
Again, I'm jealous, covetous of those ears.
Conducting.
Yeah.
Let's go to conducting.
We're avoiding the thing that comes before everything.
Go.
Score study.
Score study, go.
You can't conduct without knowing the score. So what's the goal of score study? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, because we were talking about the essence of time, and everybody's crushed for time, and using the time as a conductor for things you can do that other people can't do, as opposed to getting caught in minutiae.
Well, that's delegation. I mean, how many 65-year-old band directors do you know? Not many. Because what happens is they get out of the profession because so much of the periphery defeats them. If they only had to do that job I'm providing the example for, where you only do the music. But what you try to do is you try to go for that. So my philosophy is if somebody else can do it, they should be doing it. If somebody else can set up the chairs and file the music and turn in that report and be the president of the band parents club, and if somebody else can do that stuff, they should be doing it, because there are many important things that only we can do as conductors. We're the only ones that can study the score. We're the only ones who can design the program. We're the only ones that can deal with the students. There are too many things that only we can do, and if we get bogged down with the periphery, we will not be a 65-year-old band director. And the other thing that we do to defeat us is we start adding on, layering our job. We decide that this year we are going to take our band to hear a Chicago Symphony concert. Great, good idea. Then next year we're going to take our ensemble to Disney World. And then people start saying, where are we going to go next year? Mm-hmm. Well, next year we're going to go to Los Angeles. Oh, cool. Well, next year we're going to go to Mexico City. Next year we're going to go to Vienna. Next year we're going to have our intergalactic tour. And so what happens is you keep adding on to this until you can't do the job anymore. So try to keep your mind and self focused on what's really important and do those things. I had a friend of mine who taught in Madison, where I taught at a local high school, and he never took his band to contest, a band festival. Never did it. And one time, one of his friends, who was the music supervisor, said, "You got to take your group. Other groups want to hear your group," because he had a good group. Other groups want to hear your group. Come and play. So do that. He said, "Okay, we'll do it." So he got together with his group, said, "We're going to do this. So let's dig in and get this done." And so they had, in Wisconsin at that point, they had to play a march. And then they had to play from the required list, and then they had to play from the selected list. So he played, the march he selected was the Country Band March of Charles Ives, and the selected piece was variants on a medieval tune, and there was a free selection. You could select anything, and then the required piece was variants on a medieval tune, and the piece that he selected that was a free choice was Hammersmith. But he never took his band to festivals. So they came back, they clearly got a 1 because they could play, and they came back and the students said, well, no, why did we do this? And would it have been better to bring somebody else in, a guest conductor or a soloist or a composer, or have some other stimulus instead of just going and playing 3 tunes for a few people? And everybody all the adjudicators said how wonderful it was. Said, why do we do this again? So I think I also thought what I would wish for every state association would be that once a group got a 1 at a festival for, I don't know, a couple years, 2 or 3 years, that they would not be allowed to go to a festival for 2 years. They would have to think of something else to do that would be musically stimulative for their ensemble. Because they've proved they can go and get the 1s. They can just keep doing that over and over and over and over and over. But if you're not allowed to do it, then you can go to the administration and say, well, we need to do other things, and so maybe we should have an exchange concert, or we live near a college, maybe we can have one of the college composers write a piece for our group and come over and interact with us. And we can do all kinds of imaginative and creative things. If we just stop doing the same thing, we go through marching messages, then we do the Christmas concert, then we do the solo and ensemble festival, and then we do the band festival, and then we do the spring pops concert, and then we do the marching band and the Christmas concert, and over and over. Just think and be creative. It's a great life if you do that.
I'm going to throw you a hard pitch. In all of this, we have to do this, we have to do this, have to do this. Is it easy to take the music making and push it on the back burner and say we'll get to it, and then we never get to it?
Well, what gets the attention are things that are needed to do right now. The immediate gets the attention. And score steady is never immediate. And so I know people that think, oh, we've got a bazillion rehearsals to do this piece, so we'll just all learn it together. Because what you're doing if you do that is you're providing an example for the players that you don't have to be prepared to come to the rehearsal.
Talk about score study. You broke it down in your outline.
Well, there are certain things you're trying to do with score study. One is to find out what makes this piece. And so I'm constantly looking for structure or certain ingredients. I mean, I go through a score if I don't know it. Let's take a score you don't, because if you know the score or whatever, then it's easier. And I go through the score just a couple times, just flipping through it, almost like you're reading a magazine in a dentist's office. You're not really reading anything, you're just kind of getting a general impression. And then I go back and I usually have a pad of paper with me and a metronome. And I set the metronome on what the speed of the piece is. And I'm not trying to go through the piece at the speed. I may be stopped on a few measures or a few notes or whatever and still tick, 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 but that's getting inside me. I'm feeling the tempo of the piece. I'm learning the piece as the tempo is hammering at me. So, and then I make notes because I'm looking for structure. That's a really important issue. And I'm also looking for clues to the ingredients that are important in this piece. And sometimes they're chords. The Wagner Trauer music, lots of things in that piece hinge on an individual chord in that piece. So you really have to know the chord structure of that. But in the rapid section of Chester Overture of William Schumann, the chords are not nearly as important as the motivic development, how the motives interact together most. And the chords, the individual chords in the Hindemus Symphony are not as important. There are pillars of key centers that are important. So you're trying to find out what the key ingredients of this piece are and what the structure is. At Wisconsin, I had a student whose name I want to say his name was Morgan, but I could be wrong. And he was a very unusual person. Unusual to the max. Anyway, he was taking a class with me and we were doing some score study and so on, and he brought into the class a roll of butcher paper. And he said, "I'd like everybody to get up on your chair." And I thought, oh dear, here it comes. And so he rolled out this roll of butcher paper. And lo and behold, you could see, if you were up high enough, you could see the entire piece and the structure of the entire piece rolled out before you. Because what we do when we see a score, then we have to turn the page, and we got 2 more pages, then we have to we got 2 more pages. But he analyzed the piece on this roll of butcher paper, and so you can see it like an architect's drawing of the entire structure of the piece. And it was fantastic, his creative imagination. But that's what we're trying to do, is see that structure. And I also look for, on my way, easy clues. In the same way, if you do crossword puzzles, you're looking for the easy words. First thing you do is look for all the easy words, because they're going to give you clues to all the hard words. So you look for suite in E flat. Well, it's a suite and it's in E flat. Those are easy clues. The first movement is chaconne. That's an easy clue. It tells you the form. And so, if you come up a piece called Zikkerak, then you have no idea what you're doing. But the next thing I do is I look for, in addition to getting all the easy clues I look for differences. And the differences could be differences in scoring, key centers, speed. It could be a fermata, a double bar, anything that says something happened here. What happened here? And then I usually, there's usually a why. And then I make a note, okay, 3 bars before C. So then this happens. What happens in that spot? Then I start asking, why did he change the scoring? Why did Persichetti do all woodwinds here and suddenly do all brass here? Something happened there. So I'm looking for differences all the way, and those are clues to structure and importance of how the piece is put together. I also try, in score study, to go from the large to the small, the big picture down to the minutia. And then after I get to the minutia, I try to go back to the big picture before I actually start conducting it. And you need to know that you're never going to end on the score study. You never say, okay, now I've got it. It's not like a crossword puzzle that you can solve it. There's always something else in there. And I would also say, know the music without its clothes on. And by that I mean without instrumentation or dynamics, it's just the basic notes and rhythms. If you can reduce that all to like a 4-hand piano part, so you can see the basic music. Because score steady is not saying, okay, the clarinets come in here, and then the trumpets come in here, and then the snare drum comes in here. That's not score steady. Score steady is knowing what the music does. Of course, the next thing you have to do after you finish the score steady thing is know what you're going to do with it. So so we talked about Chester Overture. There's an opening section, and then it comes to the end, and it's got this little extension on the opening. Most people know Chester Overture, so at the end of the opening section, it's boo-dee-dee-dee, bap. So how long is that note? How long is that fermata? Boo-dee-dee, fermata. How long are you going to hold that? Those are decisions you're going to make. But if you know that the tune is boo-dee-dee-dee-dom, if you know that that's the tune, because the tune has been stated several times before that, then you know that you can't last so long on that fermata that you interrupt the anticipation of the next note. You can only hold it so long so that so we still anticipate the next note being boom, except the next note is whap, a surprise. So that's a decision you make about how long you're going to hold it. I can't hold it this, but I've got to hold it this, and et cetera, et cetera. So you then start making decisions with the information you have. And that's when the interpretation becomes yours, based upon this. And you can come to a rehearsal with 2 or 3 interpretations. Let's try this. Do you think there should be a crescendo here? And you can talk to the group. What do you think? Let's try it this way. Let's try it this way. How many think that we should put a crescendo here to this point? So how many think we shouldn't put, nothing's marked, we shouldn't put anything there? Now what about a diminuendo? We go, ooh. How many like that? Oh, something like that. So you're also teaching them that there are options to what you're doing with the interpretation. I would also say own your own scores. Don't use the school scores, because you may not, except for Rich Fisher, you may not be at that school forever. Then you are going to move to some other school, and you're going to have to leave all those scores there. Own your own scores and make your own marks in the score. The ideal would be to have a score in which you mark up like crazy and then don't use it when you conduct. That's ideal. Because what happens when you mark a score, what happens to me anyway, it's all autobiographical, when I mark a score, it kind of gets into me a little bit more. But then if I use a score when I'm conducting at rehearsals and concerts, I tend to only read the marks I've put in. And the things I haven't marked somehow go into the background, and maybe they shouldn't. So just a thought on that. I think in the architecture, you need to know where the piece is going, where the big points, where the medium big points are, what the direction is to this. But then you also need to be spontaneous about the little things. It's like taking a trip. If you're going to travel from Chicago to Ann Arbor, you're going to go down, I-90 and then get on I-94 and across the state of Michigan. But you don't know where you're going to stop for lunch. You don't know where you're going to go get gas. There's some sites along the way you might want to stop for. That's all the spontaneous stuff. And the same thing happens in the score. You don't want to do the same retard, build in the same drilled interpretation every time, but you certainly want to know where the big points. You're going to stay all night in Ann Arbor. You're going to know that. You're not going to say, well, I'll just go until I get tired and then I'll stay someplace. Very few of us take trips like that. And it's the same thing with a score study. The big things you really know and the directions you really know, and the little things are all spontaneous. Is that enough on score study?
That's great. Let's jump to conducting and start out by sharing the Zach story with us.
Oh, Zach?
Yeah.
My dog. My wife and I have a couple dogs, and we had another dog. Zach was the first dog we had, Australian Shepherd. And Zach died a few years ago. But when he was a puppy, I took him to dog training class. And the teacher, the dog training teacher, said something that just seared into my mind. She should have been a conducting teacher. She said, don't ever give your dog a command that you do not insist that it follow. Because if you do, you're teaching your dog that he doesn't have to follow your commands. If you do this in a rehearsal and they don't play softer and you go right on, they're learning they don't have to follow that. And what happens to us when we get serious about something in a rehearsal, we'll stop and tell them, okay, now I want it softer there at letter C. But what maybe we should do is do this, and when they don't play softer, say, I was talking to you. Did anybody have any idea what I was saying when I did this? Oh yeah, well you wanted it softer. Well, okay. I didn't hear anything. Overreact to my gestures. But that means you have to give gestures with real meaning and commitment. So the conducting issue is a communicative thing. The other thing I would suggest you do with conducting and gestures is if you stop and talk to them, give a gesture as the object of the sentence. Trombones, I'd like it a lot more instead of smooth. Trumpets, could you be more on those notes? That's going to do two things. That's going to sensitize them to gestures, and they're going to learn what your gestures are. And then you're either sensitizing them to gestures or you're desensitizing them to gestures. So gestures are a way of talking to the group without stopping. And gestures go in a different part of the brain than words do. Words go in the left side, gestures go in the right side. And the right side is where the intuitive part is. That's where music lives. That's where love lives and all those intuitive things. So that's a lot of the basis of conducting. I would also, at home, I would practice in the same way you want students to practice. You want students to practice scales, arpeggios, and so forth. And why do you want them to do that? Because you want them to put all those things on automatic. You want the technique to be automatic. So when they see an A, they just automatically put down 1 or 2. They don't even think about it because they've done it so often. And so what you need to do at home is just do 1,000 4/4s a day until you're not thinking about it. You can carry on a conversation, you can watch TV, you can read a book, you can do all kinds of other things that don't involve a hand. And then you can do 3/4s and 1/4s, and you can even get to start doing 5/8s until you don't have to think about it. Because if you have to think about what you're doing conducting-wise, you're not listening very hard. Your senses are muted. So you need to practice at home. Also, Elizabeth Green did the other thing that band conductors tend to do is when things get energetic, they lock up their wrist. And so I would advise you to go home and put out a music stand or a table or something and get a baton and do 1,000 taps on the stand. Until this becomes fluid. And then increase the volume of that. So that you're doing the basics along with the players. That's important.
When you watch conductors, things come to mind that go, if we could shift this or maneuver this over here, it would make it so much better for the ensemble. What comes to mind?
I've done a lot of conducting workshops.
Yeah.
Mostly, conductors are making the mistakes by following the rules. They're not they're conducting the beats, they're conducting on the beat, they're not conducting between the beat, so a crescendo comes then. That becomes a crescendo. Crescendo does not become So you want to conduct as you would play it. So if you would play, then that energy that you're giving out playing is the same kind of energy and resistance that you would use conducting. So, and again, I think you have to have within you a shadow beat that's going all the time inside. No one sees it. It's just going. And you can return to it, but it's only there because it's inside you. But then you're going to go, oh. But if you have to get back to it because people are beginning to fall apart, you can do that immediately. Because it doesn't leave you. It's just not visually evident. Am I making any sense on that?
No, right. It leads into that, am I keeping the band together or am I?
Yeah. This is a very interesting thing. If you were doing a march or something that had a lot of rhythm to it, and strangely enough, if you were doing an elementary band, you wouldn't conduct them. You would just let them play, and they would go do 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 dee 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 ba 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 da da dee da 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 da, and you wouldn't have to go beat. They would just do it because they would feel it. But when we conduct more advanced groups, we feel we somehow have to be with them. But you should be conducting not what they're doing already on their own, but what they need help with. So they may not know that the direction is dee, 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 da, dum, bum, bum, bum. That's what we need to be conducting. We don't need to be conducting this if they can already do it. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're conducting Irish tune and they can't stay together, then they need a beat. Mm-hmm. But if there's a beat inside the music and everybody feels it, then we don't need to be conducting that beat. What would you be doing? Well, how would you conduct if you didn't have to keep them together? Then what would you do? Keep asking yourself that question when you're in front of your own group. And then try to conduct those things that are going to make musical sense rather than I'm doing something. I've got something to do. I can keep the beat.
Talk about energy because, again, that's one of the trademarks you have, the right amount of energy focused in the right place at the right time versus energy just for the sake of energy.
Yeah, that's part of another package too. That conductors are really conducting three things, and not at the same time usually. One is we're just monitoring. Things are going okay, everything's fine. I don't have to do much, everybody's doing the right thing. The other thing is we're giving instructions, a little bit less here, a bit shorter there, more volume in the back. Okay, and the other thing is that we're inspiring them. Oh, feel this music, can't you feel that? Or, oh, can't you feel that? So there's those three things, and they go on, maybe two of them together, but usually it's only one together. And so, and most of the time you're monitoring. You're just listening to the group play, because hopefully they can play on their own a lot. And then as you get more and more experience, you begin to become sensitive to when you're needed and when you're not needed, so that you can enter into it when you're needed, but you can let them play on their own. Because if they have to attend to you all the time, they can't listen as well to each other. They're having to put a bunch of their attention on each other, so they don't become this chamber ensemble. I have a friend of mine who plays the horn in the Boston Symphony, and I was asking him a couple of years ago about what's it like now that Levine is the music director of the Boston Symphony. He said, well, Levine treats us like a big chamber ensemble. He said, he almost never keeps it. He's just showing us how the music should go, but he's not keeping us together. And they did a series of Brahms symphonies, and most of the Brahms symphonies end softly. And a couple times I was just horrified by what I saw. Because he got to the end of the Brahms symphony and put the phone, doo, and they went, doo, bah, right together. How could they do that with this? But they felt it together. I mean, they were in sync together. They didn't need him to stay together. It wasn't a visual sign. He was trying to show them the deterioration of the music. More of the conduct, and that's a gradual thing. You can't start out. I did a conducting workshop a number of years ago in Indiana, and I was preaching you don't have to conduct the beat. You know, you can wean them from the beat and so forth. So I went to the Midwest Clinic and saw one of the guys in the hallway. He said, I was at your Indiana conducting workshop, and I've got to tell you that what you told us about not conducting the beat doesn't work at all. What I failed to tell them is you've got to wean people away. You can't just go from only beat to no beat. There's got to be some middle ground in there, and how and when you do that.
Talk about energy for the sake of energy that may not connect.
Well, most of us are attracted to energy. And I think that when the group has the energy is when you can withdraw it. If the group has hold of the energy, then you just have to be occasional energy. We sometimes think the music is more significant if we add an extra amount of energy. And I'm of the belief that if you can stimulate the group, and once they get it, then you keep fanning. It's like rolling a ball down the street. You know, once you get that ball going in a direction, it almost just continues on its own. If you want to change direction, then you have to add some energy to change the direction. But the continuation of it. What I'm disturbed about a lot is people who use energy in lieu of musical substance. They somehow substitute those two, and I don't think they should.
Speak to that. An example would be?
Anything that's loud and thunderous. They would add the energy in lieu of providing the musical direction for that piece. Or the sensing of this piece is, and letting out the feeling. So there's a difference between that and this. Because this doesn't communicate much. It doesn't say how I want you to play it. Use of energy is very tricky stuff.
Through your own career, countless times, have you learned to focus it better, you're more careful with what you do with it. Pastels, different colors.
Yeah, I don't think about it that way though. I think about the music as the music, and the music comes out as whatever color it has. The composer puts that in, or the composer puts something in, and I interpret it as pastel because I believe that's the way it is. But that's part of that score study process, and you just start making decisions.
Can I shift transit to?
No.
Okay.
What?
Go ahead. No, finish your thought. I'm with you.
One other thing about conducting before you get off this, maybe the biggest detriment to us band conductors is the repeated conducting motion, the repeated conducting gesture, the visual screen. This is what I do. This is it. And by the time you do this half a dozen times, people aren't watching anymore. And then you're going to do this. And they're not going to respond. You're going to say, you're not watching. But what they've seen is wah, 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 when you didn't mean to do much. If you don't mean it, then don't do much. Then just conduct. Monitor. But it's that visual screen that gets in the way of communication. And that is pervasive in our profession. I don't know how you get away from that, but we've got to do that.
Is it because now I've got something to do?
Yes. We don't know what else to do, so we do something.
I've got this. At least I'm doing something.
Right. If you don't have a thought about what to do, then don't do anything.
Right.
But you should have. Often, we make a decision about a person's musicianship. I think this is a very fine musician. We'll make that decision based upon, in many instances, upon the direction that we hear in the music. So the music moves toward this direction, and then we feel, well, that person is a good musician because they're bringing out the music. And a lot of it has just to be aware of where you want the music to go, and often it goes or it doesn't. I mean, it has positive direction or it has negative direction. It's moving away from this idea. It goes, whoa, because there's both positive direction and negative direction. But that's often what we think about when we talk about music. Okay, you can go on now.
Thanks. So many of us that will be watching this video and the people in the audience are directors. They're in charge of the whole program. They're talk about role modeling in terms of a musician, a conductor, a director, the leadership aspect.
Well, it's what you do all the time. It's your values. It's how you talk to the group. And if you talk to them about music, about literature, I've been reading this book. Take a look at this. Bring in a work of art. Bring in a Chagall or something that's filled with color, and they will begin to pick up your value about art and music, or they'll begin to pick up your value like it's got to be this way. And if I weren't a musician, I would be a CPA, because that's where I am.
And the importance of our own standards and growth.
Now, growth is a separate thing. Standards are something else. We can talk about standards.
Talk about growth.
Standards come first.
You want to go first?
Yeah.
Standards first.
These are musical moments. Okay? Now, how many of those are you do you believe are correct? So we're going to draw a circle of tolerance. Okay? Then all of these are out of bounds. They are out of tune, the wrong notes. They're not acceptable because we have drawn our circle of tolerance, and all these guys on the outside are interfering with the music. Therefore, we're not going to tolerate them. Now this is now then we're a better band director than we were when we tolerated everything. Okay, now then we get to some other band directors. And we're only going to tolerate that. These other things are okay, but they're clearly not good enough. So that's what we're going to tolerate. So how you draw your circle of tolerance, what you're going to put up with in the rehearsal, how many bad sounds, or even not just bad, but inappropriate, or not exactly your idealized internal sound. That's where you're going to draw the circle. And that's your standard. And there are two kinds of standards. There's an objective standard and a subjective standard. So I mean, the objective standard is much easier to understand. That's when something's out of tune, the precision is wrong, the attacks are wrong, the dynamics are not correct. All the objective things, those are easy to understand. It's when the feeling doesn't feel right. This tempo is not quite right.
I'm curious about the point that when you get to there, when you say this is it, then the people start to come around to draw to it. The students begin.
You have to know what you have to know what it is, though. You have to know it when it's right, because you've internalized it through the score study. You have determined what your idealized internal oral image is. And so all the good conductors in the world do two or three, four things in common. I mean, they rehearse differently, they conduct differently, but there are certain things that every one of those great people do. They're first of all a really wonderful musician, and I don't mean necessarily a wonderful player. Zubin Mehta is a wonderful musician, but he was kind of a mediocre string bass player. Mm-hmm. Is this on tape? But they also have a clear idea of what the music is going to be when they get it the way they want it. They have a clear, predictable target. And then they're determined to get it the way they want it. And the way they do that is completely different from person to person. Dudamel will be different from Schulte and different from, everybody. And because they've got this internal oral image here. And this is the sound they want. And then they get this. And then they just start struggling to pull this to here. But they're just not going for perfection. They're going because the music has to be this way. No, the emphasis is here. You keep putting the emphasis over here. And no, it's not. That's an accent, but it isn't a tongued accent. It's a stressed accent. So the music goes, woo. It doesn't go dee. I know it says accent, but so you have to decide all those things ahead of time.
Standards, now let's talk about growth. I mean, you've been at it a while now.
Yeah.
You'll make a profession out of it.
Yep.
Okay. So is Bob Reynolds growing and learning and
I hope so.
Continuing, and I mean the people here to hear you, the people watching the DVD, where is self-growth?
Well, you're either growing or you're dying. You're not staying the same. You're never staying the same. You're either moving up or down. Mm-hmm. And I had a saying on my wall that I was on my wall at Michigan, and when I left I took it with me now, it's in the house at home. It says, change is inevitable. Growth is an option. You can decide you're going to grow or not. And in order to grow, you've got to be vulnerable. Safety and growth are not synonymous. You cannot be safe and grow at the same time. So you've got to risk it in order to grow. And then you have to put yourself in situations that are going to be fruitful for that growth. And you've got to search them out. I mean, the people that are here decided they wanted to spend the morning doing this. Mm-hmm. They could have spent the morning watching cartoons. I mean, but they decided that this was more important. Now, and sometimes that works out, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you decide you're going to go and for a growth experience, and there's no growth experience there. But you went there. I went. A couple of examples. A few years ago was Mozart's 250th birthday. January 27th, I think it was. I don't know. Was it
Same birthday.
Really?
Yeah.
Good for you. So as I usually do over the summer, I kind of search around the internet to see what concerts are going on the next season and so on. And I said, something's got to be going on in New York on Mozart's birthday. So I looked on, Lincoln Center and Carnegie Hall, and lo and behold, there was an all-Mozart concert in Carnegie Hall on Mozart's birthday, played by the Berlin Philharmonic with Simon Rattle. Mm. And the concert was to begin with the Grand Partita, a piece that has meant maybe as much or more than any piece in my life to me, about my growth and so forth, and it continues to mean a lot. There's this great wind serenade that they're playing tomorrow night in Chicago. So I said to my wife, we're going to this concert. So we got tickets in the summer and went to the concert. And I didn't want to let it go at that. Remember this, I was talking before about this clarinet player at Interlochen telling, how we played so well in tune that everybody just listened. The same guy, who's a conducting clarinet teacher at Oberlin, had a clarinet student who was the son of Simon Rattle. And so I contacted Richard and said, can you get me the home address of Simon Rattle? Because I've got a few books of a holograph of the original manuscript. It's now been reproduced by some publisher or other. And so I sent one of those holographs to Simon Rattle because they were originally housed. The original Grand Partita manuscript is in the Library of Congress. We all own it. All of us United States citizens own that piece. So he wrote me back a note that said, "Wow, thanks very much," and this. And I told him we were coming to the concert. He said, "Well, if you're coming to the concert, why don't you come to the rehearsal?" So I said, okay. But I know how Carnegie Hall is, so I asked him to put us on the backstage list, and I never heard back from him, so I don't know whether he did or not. So I just walked up to the backstage and said, we need to be at this 10 o'clock rehearsal. Could you buzz us through? The guy went, eh. He didn't look at the list. I don't know whether we were on it or not. So we went to this rehearsal, heard this great rehearsal of this great group playing the great wind piece of all time, and then being the kind of guy that I am, for better or for worse, after the rehearsal was over, I just walked right up on stage, stuck out my hand. I said, I'm Robert Reynolds. And he said, oh, I know who you are. So we got into a discussion with me and Simon Rattle and the members of the Berlin Philharmonic Wind Section about the Grand Partita. Amazing.
Yeah.
And you just need to do that, and sometimes it works. I'll tell you one other story, and then I'll get off this. There's a former student of mine, Stuart Sims, who, and when we had classes at Michigan, they would present pieces in the class, and if ever they presented a piece by a living composer, they had to try to contact that composer. So he contacted Michael Colgrass and got into discussion with Michael Colgrass about this piece. And in the course of the discussion, after a while, it became clear that Stuart Sims knew an awful lot about Michael Colgrass's music. So Colgrass said, one of my pieces is being premiered this weekend in Toronto. Why don't you come over and hear the premiere? And Stuart said, well, okay. He said, well, you can stay at my house. I'll get you tickets. So based upon that call and the knowledge that he knew the piece,
To hang out.
you just seek out there. The worst thing that can happen is somebody says, I don't want to talk to you. Go away, Sonny.
You're already there, though, if you don't call.
Yeah, but that's never happened. It's never happened. I called William Schumann one time on the phone. Crazy. And I said, we were doing When Jesus Wept. At the beginning, it says muffled field drum. I called him and I said, I just looked in the New York phone book. He was in there. I said, are you the composer? And he said, yes. And I said, I'm Robert Reynolds. And he said, who? And I said, I've got a question about the beginning. I said, the muffled field drum. I said, I'm assuming that that's without snares, but it doesn't say without snares, so I just want to be sure. He said, oh, yes, it's without snares. I said, well, I'm really sorry to bother you. I apologize for such a little detail. He said, oh, I'm very glad you called me. He says, because what you told me was the fact that you care so much about the music to call about some really very small detail. I also...
Go.
I know I'm spending
you're
too
fine.
much.
Go.
But I also called Norman Della Gioia. Just pass this on to you about variants on a medieval tune. After the short introduction, then there's the theme, the In Dulce Jubilo theme, be-do-do-dee-da, but the bass clarinet goes da-dee-dee-do-do-do-dee-do. And I said, you know, do you ever think about having the bass clarinet go down to low C? He said, well, bass clarinets can't go down to low C. I said, well, they can now. He said, really? He said, well, of course it should go down. So meanwhile, all us band conductors see that the note goes up. So we play it up because that's what the composer wrote. But it seemed like that was wrong to me because the real tune goes down. Anyway, enough of that. I just had a great life inserting myself in various situations and with great reward coming back at me.
For them, too.
I don't know about them,
I think so.
but me.
Sounds like it. Let's take a break. We'll come back and do our questions. Does that work? Okay, thanks.